Hey everybody. Well, I finished debris fishing, and it's time to work on my next project, which is going to be people-based, so that I can have spaceships and people at the same time, because that will make me happy. Problem is that generating 3D characters is fairly difficult. I've been generating 2D characters since before there was an internet, but generating 3D characters is considerably more difficult for me. I can model a 3D character, but modeling a character that's supposed to be 300 characters is a little bit more difficult. So, let's talk about why. And if you're a pro at this, feel free to chime in. So, if you've ever worked with Make Human or anything else that lets you adjust people's faces, you've probably been able to create a lot of different faces and they look relatively good, right? So, you've got a skinny character and you've got a fat character. And they look pretty decent in terms of their, screenshots. The problem is, and you may have noticed this, they can't animate very well. Their animations go to crap. The further they get from the default, the worse the animations get. Let's give you an example. When the thin character opens their mouth, it looks fine because a thin character is the default, and so all of the bone weighting for this jawbone is for the thin character. If your fat character opens their mouth, then it's not going to work out. Let's see if I can get my hands to work here. Here we are. It's going to end up looking like this. And that's not how it should look. Now, the reason that it malfunctions like this is because this and this are the same verts. The mesh moves the verts around. It doesn't replace the verts. And unless you go to some lengths to re-weight the bone, you end up with this part of the flesh trying to react in the same way that this part of the flesh reacted, and it just ends up folding in on itself and basically folding out of existence, and it's super weird and creepy. And people do this. Like, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of images of people, indie game people, putting together their characters, trying to put together a heavy character, and the heavy character's fat doesn't look right. You can make the fat look right. All you have to do is re-weight the character. But re-weighting the character to make the fat look soft is something that is a lot of extra effort, right? So most indie devs, they don't really do that. And most games don't do this. Most games don't include fat people because they would have to re-weight all of the bones. So that's a big problem. And it's even more of a problem in a sci-fi setting where we might have completely different character visuals entirely. Like, we might have a hog-snouted character, and we might have someone with huge eyes, or someone with an extremely tiny, tiny chin. And if we wanted to have these kinds of Star Trek species, we have to re-weight where the bones are and what the bone weights are. So we have to move everything around. We have to re-weight it. We have to make it work. The worst part about this is it's not just like fat guy, thin guy mesh. Just for humans, it would be at least 6 different meshes, and then I'd have to have another 6 meshes for every alien species out there, and that's just not feasible. What I'd really like to do is I'd like to have one set of resources and be able to kind of create whatever I need. So I want to be able to have the pig-nosed guy use either the fat guy neck or the thin guy neck rather than being limited to pig-nosed species neck. And it's the same way with all of the other parts. So this is a very difficult thing to do because it means that you have to stitch together different skinned meshes. So if you wanted to have a character which had the ability to be anybody, you would have to cut their mesh apart at specific points and then be able to substitute in sub-meshes that have the same outer edge shape. For example, there might be a mouth like this, and then there might be like a chin like this, or maybe even like this, and then there might be a nose, and then there might be eyes, and there might be the scalp area with, you can replace it with earless Klingon faces or tentacle heads or whatever else, right? So if you carve up the face like this, you can stitch the face together out of sub-elements, and then each of these sub-elements can have their own bone weighting. But they're probably still all using the same bones. So you got the same skeleton for all the characters, because we're thinking Star Trek-y stuff, so there's just pretty basic skeleton stuff. But they all have different meshes attached to the bones, so we could have, snout noses or no noses or horn noses or whatever else, but they're all attached to the same bone structure. And that works. I've seen some people do this. The problem is that Unity and stitching together skin to mesh renders or skin meshes is actually a little challenging, and I'm not sure it's going to work out very well. I do know that I'm probably going to have to finish applying all the shape keys before I stitch the mesh together. So, for example, we're not going to have a different nose mesh for every possible human nose. We're probably going to have like one human nose mesh and then have some shape keys so that it can take the form of a whole bunch of different shapes of human noses. And if we do that, then all I have to do is have randomized shape keys and then bake it and then turn it and then stitch it in when I'm done baking it. But this has a lot of other problems. One of the other problems is that it's a specific size. So for this particular example, how would you make a fat character? Well, obviously you can replace this part with something that is fat, but how about this part? Does this fat suddenly just begin underneath his ear? So when you have this kind of issue, you're starting to worry about how the various meshes are going to end up conflicting with the seams that you've added. And this is a challenge that I haven't really worked out. There are a couple of different approaches, and it depends on what I want. So for example, let's say that I wanted to have a really wide-faced alien. How do I make Mr. Wide-Faced Alien? Well, I can't use these coordinates. If these are the permanent coordinates that are going to be shared by every face, they're going to look like this, and it's going to end up making this guy look like a skull with bulging elements. It's going to look very, very strange. So in order for me to make characters that don't have the exact same facial structure at the sides and stuff like that, I'm going to need to allow for deformation after the face has been stitched together, which means that this character would end up, having a facial structure kind of like this, which is the same sort of bone structure, but it's been really, really warped by some mechanism after it's been assembled. And that would mean that I might have several different bone structures. So I'd have like the animation bones, but I'd also have the structural bones. They might be in the same skeleton, maybe not. I'll have to figure that out. But basically, it's clear that what I need to be able to do is fairly complicated. I have to use different meshes for the different kinds of face pieces. I have to use shape keys so that I can change the different meshes without needing hundreds of thousands of them. I have to stitch them together, and then I have to use bone weighting to change them again. That's a lot. So I'm hoping there's an easier way to do it. I don't think there is. Keep in mind I'm using Unity, so it's a bit of a challenge to just say, use this mathematical thing in Maya. I can't. So I just am struggling with this and trying to figure it out, and it's really rocky for me. But this is a path. I can do this. This is not impossible. It's just that it's a lot. So I might try this. This might be what I dive in on next week. The other thing that I haven't really thought about is what I want my people to look like in terms of realism. I'm not very good at the mind's eye stuff, so when I think about how they're supposed to look, I have a really hard time feeling really enthused about any particular visual, just because my visual sense is stuck on the spaceship. My default is realism, right? I love realism because I'm just an old school nerd and I grew up on TV shows, and TV shows have actual people in them, right? So when I think about spaceship crews, I think about things that you normally think of as very high realism. I think about the fact that you can see the light through their ears when the red alert goes off, or you can see the pores on their face when they get up close to the camera. But that's expensive in terms of creating that. And it might be better if I use something that would mask my incompetence a little bit better. It might be better to try for a more anime-esque visual where I use much more forgiving cell shading, faces that don't have a lot of texture to them, stuff like that. And that would be more forgiving. But I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting excited for that. I could try and do something like puppets, but believe it or not, puppets are actually harder because their faces vary by so much from puppet to puppet that I can't really figure out where I would combine mesh elements to make it work. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I hope to see you in my streams as I try and work this out myself.